It was raining that morning. Not the kind of soft, nostalgic drizzle you'd find in a movie, but cold, harsh sheets of water that slapped against the windshield as I parked in front of Whitlow and Granger law offices. I sat in the car for a moment, watching the wiper struggle to keep up, my fingers clenched tight around the steering wheel. I hadn't expected the day to feel like this, like a funeral inside a courtroom. But that's exactly what it was. The death of Evelyn Whittaker, my mother-in-law, had hit me harder than I could admit. Even though she'd been sick for a while, even though the calls had become less frequent toward the end, some foolish part of me believed she'd still be here when I needed her most. She wasn't my mother by blood, but in many ways, she had been more of a mother to me than my own ever was. The official letter had come just 2 days after her passing, summoning me to the reading of her will. I wasn't sure why I was included. I had no expectations. Evelyn was generous, yes, but this wasn't about money. I came because I owed it to her, and because part of me needed closure. I stepped out into the storm, my heels clicking across the wet sidewalk, the black dress I wore clinging uncomfortably to my skin. The building loomed ahead, gray stone and glass reflecting the gloom of the sky. But just as I reached the stairs leading up to the firm, I froze. He was there, Miles, my husband. He stood under the awning, dry and polished in his tailored navy suit, his tie the same shade of arrogance he always wore like armor. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, smiling with that painted, perfect mouth, was Tessa Clay, younger than me by a decade and proud of it. Her makeup was flawless despite the rain, and in her arms she held a bundled newborn, cradled like a trophy. My stomach twisted. I had suspected. Of course I had. The late-night calls, the sudden business trips, the scent of someone else's perfume clinging to his collar. But knowing is different from seeing. And seeing them together, whole, complete, felt like being hit square in the chest with a blunt object. Miles saw me. He didn't flinch, just tightened his jaw and gave me that familiar look. Half pity, half disdain. Tessa looked me up and down like I was an inconvenience, like I had no right to be there. She shifted the baby in her arms and whispered something to him, laughing softly. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to turn around and vanish into that rain, never to see either of them again. But something rooted me there. Maybe pride, maybe spite, maybe the ghost of Evelyn standing somewhere behind me, urging me not to run. So I straightened my back and climbed the stairs. Neither of them moved to greet me. They stepped aside just enough to let me pass. I kept my eyes forward and walked into the building like I still belonged in their world. Inside, the office smelled like old wood and expensive paper. A tall man with a clipboard nodded politely and led us to a conference room. The walls were lined with dark bookshelves, the windows blurred with rain. Miles and Tessa took seats across from me, whispering to each other behind tight smiles. I sat alone. The only sound was the ticking of a vintage wall clock and the faint rustle of paper as the lawyer, Mr. Wallace Granger, entered the room, holding a thick brown folder. He cleared his throat and looked at us with calm, unreadable eyes. We're here today to read the last will and testament of Mrs. Evelyn Whittaker, he began, his voice steady, almost gentle. Present are her son, Mr. Miles Whittaker, and his companion, Ms. Tessa Clay, as well as Mrs. Marianne Foster. My heart jumped at the sound of my name. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear it said aloud, needed to be acknowledged. Mr. Granger continued, opening the folder slowly. Before we begin, I'd like to inform you that Mrs. Whittaker also left a personal letter, which will be read at the conclusion of the official statement. The room went still. Tessa crossed her legs. Miles folded his arms. I sat motionless, hands clenched in my lap, bracing for the truth Evelyn had left behind, whatever it might be. The last time I had seen Evelyn alive, she was sitting in her sunroom wrapped in a pale shawl, a cup of chamomile tea trembling slightly in her hands. She'd looked smaller than I remembered, frilier, but when she spoke, her voice still carried that quiet certainty I had come to rely on over the years. That day, she reached over, took my hand, and said, "You're stronger than you think, Marianne. Don't ever let anyone make you forget that." I didn't know she was saying goodbye. When I first married Miles, Evelyn welcomed me with a warmth I hadn't expected. She was refined and private, the kind of woman who used silence as punctuation, but she never made me feel like an outsider. Not once. Maybe it was because she saw something in me, something her son never bothered to look for. Back then, Miles had been attentive, or at least he played the part well. We were the polished couple at every gala, the smiling faces in every holiday card. But behind closed doors, I was invisible. My ideas were cute, my concerns dramatic. And when I started asking questions about his late nights and phone calls from clients, he stopped even pretending to care. Tessa Clay wasn't a surprise. Women like her rarely are. Bright lipstick, louder laugh, always touching his arm like she owned it. I had seen them together once, accidentally at a charity event Evelyn was hosting. They didn't see me. I stood behind a floral arrangement, frozen, watching her lean in and whisper something that made him smile in a way he hadn't smiled at me in years. I didn't confront him. Not then. I went home, reheated leftovers, folded laundry. I stayed quiet because that's what I had been taught to do. But Evelyn saw. She always saw. After that event, she invited me over more often. She never said Miles' name, never asked about my marriage. But she'd watch me with those steady eyes as if she were waiting for me to break, and silently willing me not to. So when she died, part of me did too. I felt unmoored, like the one person who truly saw me was gone, which is why I walked into that law office expecting nothing. No property, no favor, no recognition, just the last trace of her voice in a room filled with people who had erased me long ago. And now here I was, sitting across from my husband and his mistress, his new family, while Evelyn's lawyer flipped through pages that would soon shatter their carefully curated delusion. They thought I would fade. Miles hadn't spoken a word since we entered the room, but he didn't need to. His silence was deliberate, dismissive. His posture screamed control. And yet the veins on his hands told a different story, twitching every time Mr. Granger turned a page. Tessa was less subtle. She shifted constantly, eyes darting toward the manila folder like it was a time bomb. She bounced the baby in her lap, though he was fast asleep, more for effect than comfort. Every once in a while, she'd glance at me and smirk like she had already won. They both had rehearsed this moment, I could tell. In their minds, Evelyn had left everything to her only son, the heir, the name bearer, the perfect reflection of legacy. And I would be offered a polite condolence, maybe a modest check, and a note thanking me for my support. But I hadn't come for money. I had come for the truth. Mr. Granger cleared his throat again and began reading aloud the legal language that somehow always sounds sterile, even when it carries the weight of a lifetime. I, Evelyn Whitaker, being of sound mind and full capacity, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament. The inventory began, each asset more shocking than the last. A fully paid home in the historic district of Savannah, a lakefront cottage near Blue Ridge, 2 investment accounts, stocks, heirloom jewelry, even a vintage Steinway piano that once belonged to her grandmother. Tessa leaned forward, lips parted slightly. Then came the pause, that long, deliberate pause that made the room hold its breath. All aforementioned assets, Mr. Granger continued, are bequeathed to Mrs. Marianne Foster. The sound of paper shifting, the creak of Miles' chair. Silence. I blinked. My ears rang. I thought maybe I had misheard. But no. There it was, printed clearly on the page, now being turned slowly in the lawyer's hand. My name. Again. Tessa's mouth fell open. Miles looked like someone had just slapped him across the face. They thought I would disappear. They were wrong. For a moment, no one spoke. The words hung in the air like the final notes of a symphony, impossible to ignore, impossible to follow. I felt my heart thudding inside my chest, not with joy, not even with shock, but with disbelief. Evelyn had left everything to me. Miles shifted beside Tessa, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly I could see the whites of his knuckles. He let out a short, humorless laugh, a sound that didn't belong in that room, among the polished mahogany and quiet reverence. "There must be some mistake," he said, voice sharp. "That's not possible." Mr. Granger didn't even look up from the document. "There's no mistake, Mr. Whitaker. This will was finalized 6 weeks before your mother's passing. It is legally binding and properly notarized." Tessa turned toward Miles, eyes wide with alarm. "You said she adored you. You said she was going to put everything in your name." Miles said nothing. She turned back to the lawyer, her voice rising now, brittle and panicked. "This is absurd. That woman," she jabbed a perfectly manicured finger in my direction, "was barely in her life. Evelyn didn't mean this. She must have been confused. Sick." Mr. Granger looked at her then, calm and steady. "Mrs. Whitaker was of sound mind and full capacity when this document was signed. You are free to contest it in court. Though I must inform you, the chances of overturning a notarized will of this nature are, frankly, negligible." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt before. Not just in the room, but inside me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't vindication. It was grief and something older than that. Something like justice. Mr. Granger continued. "Should Mrs. Foster choose to decline the inheritance, all assets shall be transferred to the Children's Oncology Relief Foundation, per Mrs. Whitaker's secondary clause." I sat frozen. I hadn't even considered that. Decline it? No. I didn't need Evelyn's money. But this wasn't about money. It never was. This was about what she believed in, what she saw in me, and what she chose to protect. I nodded once. "I accept." The simple words were enough to reignite the room. Miles stood, knocking back his chair. "You manipulative little!" He stopped himself, eyes darting to Mr. Granger, who remained entirely unfazed. "My mother would never have done this. She loved me." I looked at him then, really looked. At the man who used to share my bed. At the man who had once held my hand in church, smiled for Christmas cards, whispered promises into my hair, all while building a life with someone else behind my back. "She loved who you used to be," I said quietly. Tessa scoffed. "Oh, please. Evelyn was old. She was probably tricked into this. Tell them, Miles. Tell them this is fraud." Miles didn't answer. Instead, Mr. Granger closed the folder and pulled out a single sealed envelope from beneath the stack. His fingers lingered on it for a moment longer than necessary. Mrs. Whitaker also left a personal letter to accompany the will. She requested that I read it aloud. He opened the envelope slowly, unfolding the letter with a kind of reverence that made my throat tighten. His voice changed when he read, softer, like even he felt the weight of the words he was about to speak. "To my dearest Marianne," my breath caught. "If you are hearing this, then I have left this world, and you are seated in a room I imagined many times. I want to begin by thanking you for everything, for your kindness, for your patience, for the way you cared for me even when others forgot. You were never just my daughter-in-law. You were, to me, a daughter." Tears sprang to my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "I know about Miles and the betrayal. I know how you kept silent when you could have screamed. I know how you held dignity when others offered none. I'm sorry I didn't say it to your face, but I saw it all and I never stopped being proud of you." I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking. Not anymore. I couldn't leave this world without setting things right. I didn't do this to punish Miles. I did it to protect you, because you deserve the chance to begin again on your own terms. Mr. Granger's voice faltered for the first time. He cleared his throat and continued. "Miles, I am disappointed. You've made choices that I cannot condone. You betrayed the woman who stood by you through everything. I hope one day You'll understand why I couldn't leave you my legacy. I hope you'll learn that some things in life, like trust, like honor, matter more than names on a deed." The room was silent when he finished. Tessa's face was blank. Miles' eyes were glossy, but he blinked quickly and turned his head away. I sat still, the echo of Evelyn's words circling through me like a wind I didn't know I'd needed. She saw me. Even at the end, she still saw me. I don't know how long I sat there after Mr. Granger finished reading. The room felt suspended in time. It wasn't just the words Evelyn had left behind. It was the silence that followed them. That kind of silence only comes when truth has landed, clean and irrevocable, leaving nothing more to say. Miles didn't look at me. He stared at the wall behind Mr. Granger, unmoving, like if he held still long enough the moment would pass. Tessa, on the other hand, was already unraveling. Her expression shifted from disbelief to anger, to something darker, panic. "This is insane," she snapped, her voice brittle. She knew about us and still gave everything to her? What kind of mother does that? I turned to her slowly, a mother who knew exactly who her son had become. That stopped her. Mr. Granger remained composed, though his fingers lightly tapped the envelope he had just returned to the folder. "As I stated earlier, you are free to challenge the contents of the will through legal proceedings," he said quietly, "though I would advise that such action may not be in your best interest." Tessa's jaw clenched. She looked to Miles, waiting for him to explode, to shout, to lead some charge of righteous fury, but he didn't. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, mouth slightly parted like he was still trying to process the fact that his mother, the woman he thought he controlled, had chosen me instead. And maybe that's what broke him. Not the money, not the properties, but the fact that she had seen him and rejected what she saw. Tessa stood abruptly, cradling the baby tighter than necessary. "This is humiliating," she hissed. "You said she would leave everything to you. You said we'd be fine. You lied." She turned on her heel and made for the door, her heels clicking like gunshots against the hardwood floor. Before leaving, she paused and looked back. "You're not the man I thought you were, Miles. You're just another broken promise." And then she was gone. Miles didn't follow. He didn't speak. He just stared at the closed door, as if it had taken his last remaining breath with it. I don't know what made me look at him then. Maybe habit, maybe pity. He had once been my husband. I had once loved him. And in that moment, as he sat there alone, shoulders curled inward like a child who had lost his way, I felt something stir. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a shift, a quiet acknowledgement that the man sitting across from me wasn't just cruel, he was crumbling. He turned to me slowly, and for the first time since I walked into that room, our eyes met. "Marianne," he whispered. I waited. He stood up, and for a moment I thought he might try to leave too. But instead he walked toward me, stopping just a few feet away. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "Please, just talk to me." I said nothing. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he continued, almost choking on the words. "But I need you to understand. I never meant for it to end this way. I didn't think she would do this." "You mean choose me?" I asked. He nodded, ashamed. Yes. There it was. The truth he had never said out loud. That all this time, deep down, he had counted on Evelyn to stay loyal to him, to the bloodline, to the image. And now, with that illusion shattered, he had nothing left to cling to. "You betrayed me, Miles," I said. "You betrayed our vows, our home. And now you're shocked that someone finally held you accountable." He didn't argue. His shoulders dropped. "I was stupid." "No," I said. "You were selfish." He reached out then, not to touch, but as if to steady himself on the air between us. "Please, I don't have anyone. Tessa's gone. The baby, everything's falling apart. I don't even have a place to stay. Can we just talk?" I looked at him, really looked. At the man who once stood beside me in front of family and friends, vowing to cherish me. And now he stood here, desperate, unraveling, clinging to the same woman he had once made feel invisible. I stood up slowly. "No," I said softly. "You don't get to ask for anything from me. Not after everything." He opened his mouth to speak, but I walked past him toward the door. I didn't look back. Let him sit there, surrounded by polished furniture and fading pride, with the ghost of his mother's disappointment still ringing in his ears. Let him feel what it's like to be truly left behind. I didn't look back when I left that room. Not at Miles. Not at Mr. Granger. I stepped into the hallway like someone stepping out of a fog, like I'd just been handed the final chapter of a book I didn't even know I was reading. Everything felt quieter, or maybe I was just quieter inside. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky hadn't cleared, not completely, but there was a stillness in the air, as if something had passed, some kind of storm that hadn't touched just the city, but me too. I walked to my car without noticing the weight of my shoes or the damp hem of my dress. My body moved, but my mind was somewhere between grief and revelation. Evelyn had seen me. She had seen everything and still loved me. She had chosen me, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because I mattered to her. And now, I had a choice. For years, my life had been built around Miles. His routines, his ambitions, his cold, conditional affection. I molded myself to fit his needs, made myself smaller, quieter, easier to love. I stayed in the background so he could shine, and when he stepped out of the spotlight to hold someone else's hand, I stayed anyway. But now, I didn't have to. A week later, the legal documents arrived in a thick envelope. I spent a full afternoon reading every word, every clause, every signature Evelyn had left behind like breadcrumbs on a path I was finally ready to walk. Then I packed. Not everything, just what mattered. I didn't want the house in Savannah. I didn't want the furniture or the art or the clothes I had once worn for events I never belonged to. I sold the main property, donated half the proceeds to the foundation Evelyn had named. The rest I kept, not out of spite, not for revenge, but because for the first time in my life I could. With Mr. Granger's help, I found a small town in Vermont, Maple Bridge. Quiet, green, the kind of place where people still wave from their porches, and the coffee shop knows your name. Evelyn had grown up near there, before the wealth and the society dinners. It felt fitting somehow to return to where her roots once were. There was an old storefront on Main Street, a place that used to be a bookstore but had stood empty for years. Its windows were dusty, the wooden sign half faded, but I saw it, and something lit up in me. I didn't know it yet, just that I had to be there. I bought it outright, named it the Hearth, a place for warmth, for gathering, for starting over. I spent months renovating, not with contractors and designers, but with my own 2 hands and a few local helpers who slowly became friends. We stripped the floors, painted the walls in soft honey tones, brought in wooden tables and mismatched chairs. I found a local carpenter who built the front counter from reclaimed barnwood. Everything was touched by someone real, someone kind. No pretense. I started baking again. It had been years. Evelyn's apple pie recipe came out first. Flaky crust, cinnamon-heavy filling, brushed with egg wash just the way she liked. I tested it 3 times before I got it right, and when I did, I cried. Not because of the pie, but because she would have been proud. The grand opening wasn't grand at all. I didn't hang a banner, didn't host an event. I simply placed a little sign in the window that said open and unlocked the door. The first customers were 2 elderly women who lived down the street. They sat by the front window, shared a slice of pie and a pot of Earl Grey, and told me about their late husbands. They left smiling. The next day they brought friends. Little by little the hearth began to fill. Young mothers with strollers, college kids with laptops, retired couples reading books in silence. The smell of baked apples and warm bread crept down the block, pulling people in. And me, I began to breathe again. There was no big moment, no dramatic revelation, just peace. For the first time in years, I was building something of my own, not for someone else, not to prove my worth, but because I wanted to, because I could. Sometimes, when I wiped the counters or lit the morning candles, I thought of Miles. Not often, just enough to remember what I had escaped. And when I did, I didn't feel anger anymore, just distance. He belonged to another life, another version of me I had already buried. The hearth became more than a café. It became a part of me. I didn't plan for it to feel like home, but somehow each little thing I touched, the mugs I handpicked from the thrift shop, the old radio that played jazz in the mornings, the yellow curtains that filtered soft light through the front windows, made it mine. Some evenings after closing, I would sit at the corner table with a cup of chamomile and just breathe, the same way Evelyn once did. I'd listen to the echo of empty chairs, to the hum of the refrigerator in the back, and feel something close to wholeness. Not happiness exactly, but peace. And that was enough. I never put up photos of the past. No wedding pictures. No framed smiles of a woman who once stood beside a man who never really saw her. Instead, I filled the walls with pressed flowers, handwritten quotes from favorite novels, and old postcards I found in the drawers of the abandoned bookstore. Life now was not about who I had been, but about who I was becoming. And people came, not in floods, but in a steady rhythm. I learned their names. I knew who liked honey in their tea and who needed extra whipped cream on their cocoa. A high schooler named Elise would come in after track practice and do her homework in the same seat by the fireplace. An older man named George brought his dog, Daisy, and sipped black coffee while she napped at his feet. A young woman once came in crying, mascara running down her cheeks, and I handed her a slice of pie without asking any questions. No one knew about my past. Not the truth of it. Not the lawyer's office. Not the betrayal. Not the will. To them, I was just Marianne, the woman who made great scones and remembered birthdays. And that felt like freedom. But peace, I learned, doesn't mean the past stays away forever. It was a Thursday morning when I saw him. I was wiping down the windows like I always did. Something soothing about the rhythm of the cloth against glass when I glanced up and froze. There he was, standing across the street. Miles. He looked older, not in the gray hair and wrinkles way, but in the way people look when life has chewed them up and spat them back out. His clothes were wrinkled, his shoes muddy. There was no Tessa, no baby in his arms, no arrogance left in his posture. He was just there, alone. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't catch. I just stood there, cloth in hand, and watched as he stepped off the curb and made his way to the door. I turned back toward the counter, told myself not to shake. He pushed open the door. The bell above it chimed, familiar, gentle. Several customers turned to look, then turned back to their coffees. He stood at the entrance for a moment, like he didn't quite know where to go. Then he spotted me. Our eyes met. I didn't smile. He walked slowly toward the counter. Not the confident stride I remembered, but something hesitant, small. "Marianne," he said, voice hoarse. I didn't respond. I heard you were here. I wasn't sure, but then I saw the name on the sign. I waited. There was no part of me that felt inclined to help him through this. He looked around the room, as if trying to take it all in. "You did this?" "Yes," I said flat. "It's beautiful." I said nothing. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "I came to say, I'm sorry, for everything." That was when the air changed. Like the temperature dropped 2 degrees, and everything slowed just enough to make the world feel heavier. "I know I don't deserve to even stand in front of you," he continued, "but not a day has gone by where I haven't regretted what I did. I lost everything, Marianne. I lost you. I lost the life we built." "No," I said. "You threw it away." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Not love, not guilt, but emptiness. And for the first time since I left that life, I didn't feel small standing in front of him. I felt whole. He took a breath. "Could we maybe talk?" I stared at him, at the man who had once made me question my worth, now standing in front of me like a hollow version of the man I married. And then I said it. No, Miles. We have nothing left to talk about. He stood there for a long moment, as if hoping I might change my mind, as if silence itself might soften the edge of what I just said. But I didn't waver. I didn't offer him a seat. I didn't ask him how he was or pretend to care about the answer. Miles had spent years turning his back on me. Now he had nowhere left to turn. He glanced around the café, at the soft lamps glowing above each table, at the quiet hum of conversations, the clink of porcelain, the warmth that filled the space. I could see it in his eyes. He knew this place wasn't just a café. It was mine. It was everything I had built from the rubble he left behind. He started, then faltered. I just wanted to see you, to say I was sorry, to ask if maybe there's a chance we could try again. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. After all this time, after everything, you want to try again? I said, stepping around the counter so I was facing him fully. Try what exactly? Pretending you didn't cheat on me? That you didn't build an entire life with someone else while I was folding your laundry and warming up leftovers you never came home to eat? His face flushed, but I didn't stop. You didn't just betray me, Miles. You erased me. You took everything we had, everything I gave you, and tossed it aside like it meant nothing. And now that she's gone, now that the money's gone, you're here? Hoping what? That I'm still standing in the same place you left me. His voice cracked. I know I don't deserve it. I don't have anyone. I don't have anything. I thought maybe if I could just see you, if I could explain. You don't get to explain, I said, cutting him off. Not anymore. He took a small step forward. Please, Marianne. I'm not asking for everything. I don't know where to go. I looked at him, then really looked. At the sagging lines of his face, the regret in his posture, the hollowness in his voice. He wasn't the man I had loved. He wasn't even the man who had hurt me. He was what was left after both of them were gone. And I felt nothing. No hatred. No pity. No longing. Just clarity. You don't belong here, I said. Not in this café. Not in this town. Not in this version of my life. He blinked, as if the words struck deeper than he'd expected. I'm happy, Miles, I continued. Truly. And not because of the money or the house or anything Evelyn gave me. I'm happy because I rebuilt myself from what you tried to break. I found peace without you. I found purpose. And I will never, ever let you take that from me again. He stood frozen. There were people watching now, quietly, discreetly, pretending not to listen, but clearly absorbing every word. I didn't care. I didn't lower my voice. I walked toward the door and opened it wide. The bell above rang out sharp and final. You need to go, I said, and don't come back. He hesitated, eyes darting to mine, searching for some crack in my voice, some old version of the woman who would have begged him to stay. But she was gone. He stepped out slowly, shoulders hunched, as if the sunlight itself weighed too much. I let the door fall shut behind him. The bell chimed one last time, then silence. Inside, everything returned to its rhythm. The customers resumed their conversations. Someone laughed. Someone stirred a cup of tea. And me? I went back behind the counter, picked up a towel, and wiped down the space where he had stood. Not because I needed to, but because I could. That night, I locked up the hearth and turned off the lights. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out at the quiet street, the same way Evelyn once looked out at me from her sunroom. Except this time, I wasn't saying goodbye. I was choosing myself. The next morning, I woke before the sun. The sky outside was still a muted gray, the kind that comes just before dawn but holds the promise of light. I walked through the quiet of the hearth, barefoot on warm wood floors, brushing my fingers along the tops of chairs, straightening a salt shaker here, a folded napkin there. Everything was still. Everything was mine. I turned on the kitchen light and began the morning prep like always, measuring flour, slicing apples, whisking batter while the old jazz station hummed softly through the speakers. There was something almost sacred about those hours. Before customers, before voices, just me, the scent of cinnamon, and the steady rhythm of choosing my own life. Every now and then, I'd catch a glance of myself in the reflection of the glass. Hair tied up, apron smudged with flour, eyes clearer than they'd been in years, and I'd hardly recognize the woman staring back. But I liked her. She was steady. She was kind. And she had learned how to stop waiting for someone else to give her permission to live. I used to think healing would look like revenge, like standing tall in a courtroom while Miles begged for a second chance, like headlines and gasps and some grand declaration of who was right and who was wrong. But it wasn't like that at all. Healing came slowly, in the quiet kindness of strangers who became friends, in the sound of the bell above the café door each morning, in the worn recipe cards with Evelyn's notes still scribbled in the margins, in the laughter of customers and the silent tears of women who didn't need me to say a word, only to pour the tea and stay close. And sometimes in the stillness of closing hours, I'd sit by the window and think of her, Evelyn. Her voice still lived in this place, in every slice of pie, in every cup of chamomile, in the way I ran this café with more heart than polish, more grace than pride. She gave me more than an inheritance. She gave me a mirror, and in that mirror, I didn't just find myself. I found the courage to begin again. I never heard from Miles after that day. He didn't write, didn't call, didn't show up again, and I was glad. Not because I hated him. I didn't. Hate takes energy I no longer have to spare. What I felt for him now was something simpler and more powerful. Closure. One afternoon, a little girl drew me a picture while her mom sipped coffee at the corner table. It was crayon on napkin, 2 stick figures under a rainbow, standing in front of what was clearly the hearth. The girl handed it to me with a shy smile and said, "This place feels safe." I kept that napkin, framed it, hung it near the door, just above the coat hooks. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Years ago, I walked into a law office expecting to be forgotten. I left it with a future, not one I had planned, not one I had even dared to hope for, but a future that belonged only to me. And now, each time I unlock the front door and flip the sign to open, I know exactly who I am. I am not a victim. I am not what was left behind. I am not the woman who was once married to Miles Whitaker. I am Marian Foster, and this is my beginning.